Hi everyone, our Roman education topic is a small one and I'm going to try and condense everything down into one video. This one's really important as it's the subject of one of your internal portfolios, so make sure you take good notes on this one. So the key questions are: number 1, what was the main focus of each stage of Roman education? Number 2, what does the education of boys and girls reveal about the lifestyles they are expected to have when adults? And number 3, what does Roman education tell us about Roman society? So we'll start off from the beginning with early education. So in the early history of Rome, education was largely up to the parents, and so young children would learn basic skills that they needed to become adults at home with their parents. So for girls, all the skills they would need to be a wife and mother, so making food, cleaning, making clothes, looking after a family and a house and so on. Whereas for boys it was preparing them to be a good Roman man and soldier, so there were a lot of physical skills. However, as society developed, education was increasingly entrusted to slaves and freedmen, so it was no longer as much the domain of the parents. All stages of Roman education aim to teach these traditional Roman values, and these are quite important sort of cultural differences that you need to be aware of. So the first one is virtus, which is courage or manliness, and of course this is part of our school motto. Pietas, which is a sense of duty, doing right by the gods, Rome and your family. Frugalitas, where we get frugality from, is being moderate or controlled in all things. Honestas is having a sense of honour. Disciplina is training or self-discipline. Industria, hard work. And constantia is persevering and being steady in your purpose. So for basic schooling, in the Roman world it was really important to speak Greek because the Greeks had been there first and there were still a lot of Greek-speaking parts in the Roman Empire. So quite often you would hire a Greek slave to be the nurse to your children, and a special slave called a paedagogos, who would often be Greek, would take them to school and keep an eye on them there. You could go to sort of elementary or primary school for a small fee, and so most parents would send their sons, and often daughters as well, to a small school. They thought it was sort of worth the money. This wouldn't be a specific building but a rented room with one teacher with up to 30 pupils. And so they'd start and finish early, taking advantage of natural light, and take a break for lunch. So the three main stages of Roman schooling are, and these are sort of terms that I've come up with, they're not sort of technical terms for them, but firstly we've got elementary or primary school, then middle, and then high school. And instead of university, Roman boys and teenagers would either head into the army, go off to Greece for further education, or train up to be a lawyer by service. So at elementary school you'd start about age 7 and go through till 11. The teacher was called a literator, and in this school you would learn how to read, write and do simple maths. So this sort of education would be really important no matter what you wanted to do. So for girls, obviously these skills would be useful in running a household, and for boys, if they wanted to have a small business or anything really, they'd need to learn some of this basic stuff. So most Roman children did actually go to school for a little while. Next we have middle school, which was ages 12 to 11. The teacher was known as a grammaticus, and that's because at this stage of education there was more of a focus on Greek and Roman grammar and literature, so looking more at the language, becoming more abstract and less practical. And they'd also learn more advanced writing and maths. And the final stage, which I've sort of called high school, is for sort of 16-year-old boys and older. The teacher was called a rhetor. That's where we get the word rhetoric from, meaning public speaking. So they would continue these basic subjects and then add in a lot of public speaking. And this was a really important skill for upper class boys to have, because they would have a very public role to play, whether that was as a politician, a lawyer, or as a general in the army. In terms of teaching techniques, Roman education was very different, and so they considered different skills to be important. So think about what is important for us to learn today at school and compare it to the Romans. So you learned things by repeating and memorizing them, and it was also important to build good character through school. So morals would feature throughout school. So at first you'd be copying out kind of morals and sayings, then you would learn them, and then you would integrate them into your speeches. Public speaking was really, really important, and so the older boys quite often would, say, be given a scenario from history. For example, you're Caesar, you're about to cross the Rubicon, what do you say, why are you doing it? So they'd have to kind of create their own speech or argument to justify something that had already happened. Just sort of for interest's sake, here's a bit of information about how the Romans actually wrote. So little kids would use a tablet, sort of a wooden tablet with a layer of wax, and they'd scratch into it with a stick called a stylus, and they'd use an abacus for calculations. Instead of paper, they used papyrus. It was usually imported from Egypt, made of reeds, very expensive, so it would really only be used by older students. And to make books, you would either roll up bits of papyrus or parchment, and they would be copied out by hand by slaves, so there were no printing presses or anything like that. So here are just a few pictures. So here we have a wax tablet and a stylus. So you could scratch out with the pointy end at the bottom and then kind of flatten or erase it with the bit at the top. Here is an abacus, and you can sort of make out Roman numerals written on it. And here is a papyrus book. So as you can see, it's sort of handwritten, and there are little mistakes and so on in there. We'll just finish off by looking at the status of teachers and corporal punishment. So quite often teachers would be freedmen, and they'd have a lower social status than their students. So in order to control them, they were allowed to physically beat them. And so from the evidence we have, it seems that corporal punishment was quite a common thing. So teachers would beat their students in order to control them. Okay, so key questions. Main focus for each stage of Roman education. What the education of boys and girls reveals about their adult lifestyles. And what does Roman education tell us about Roman society? So make sure you've got notes on all that, and we'll discuss it in class.